Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Film Haven Reviews. I'm your host, Sawyer, as always, and today we are continuing our bloody Western theme with the 1968 film that has a very long name, as you probably saw in the episode title. If you meet Sartana, pray for your death.
I am your pallbearer.
Which is very classic to me. A lot of Italian movies, especially like giallos. Like, there's one movie, I'm going to totally butcher it, but it's like your heart is a locked door and only I have the key or something is like the name of the movie. We're going to do that eventually, of course. I love a good needlessly long title. Sometimes I've seen posters for this that just says Sartana. But it turns out this movie is actually part of like a big string of sequels. I guess this is like a spaghetti western franchise. And apparently, as the movies go on, they get more ridiculous, as sequels tend to do. And they get to the point where at one point, Sartana has like a robot sidekick. And I'm like, okay. There is, as we'll get into, there is a bit of a kind of almost, it's hinting at what I could see later as being like a sort of wild, wild west kind of thing where you're in the West, an old West technology, but you've got this kind of almost steampunky bit of sci-fi technology. Sartana has all kinds of little gadgets that he uses, which is kind of fun. Although the gadgets are a little lame, in my opinion, but we'll get into that in a little bit. Not too much to talk about with this movie. I wanted to do another spaghetti western that was a little closer to 1969. And this one was also somewhat highly regarded. It's got a 6.3, which doesn't seem like that's highly regarded, but for a spaghetti western, that's pretty good. And the reviews seem to say that this movie and its kind of sequels are pretty iconic for people who are into this genre. And since I'm just kind of dipping my toe into this, I thought, well, might as well watch a classic. And two, it looked like a more of an action movie. So that is why, obviously, the last movie was very action based, but this one is even more focused on action. And so I wanted to see if there's any connections between, say, what I'm seeing in this film and what we saw in The Wild Bunch. And so far, I can say, yeah, I think that there are some connections, especially in just the amount of violence in this film. Violence is the right word, but it makes it sound like it's worse than it is. It's very much not the type of violence we're seeing in The Wild Bunch. Not as much, not any, hardly any blood. A lot of just like, ooh, and falling over and stuff like that. But the actual act, like the kill count of the movie is really high. Well, I'm already getting into the overview, so let's get into the overview. 6 out of 10. So I'm giving it the same score as I gave the last movie that we did. It just yeah, Massacre Time and this film are similar in a lot of ways. Obviously, they're spaghetti westerns. I would say where Massacre Time actually had a more engaging story, which is saying a lot about this movie's story. Um, it it was a little bit more entertaining to watch. I think Junior's character being so weird made it fun for me to watch. I think it was a little more, this movie's a little bit more conventional in some ways, and I think that makes it more boring, especially when it comes to the story. There's more action, and the action is really well choreographed, but the actual stories parts are just like, oh, I just like couldn't care less. And I kind of felt that way with the last film, but just it was accented a little bit more by some of the like so bad it's good entertainment value. This one was like more competently made, and that somehow made it less enjoyable, which is really strange to me. But I think if you watch it, you would understand what I'm talking about. So yeah, I 6 out of 10. It's kind of on the same level because the action's better. Some of the setting is the set, not the setting, but the atmosphere is better. The just sense of like coolness, the style is better. But the story is just, ooh, as we'll get into. Like I said, the super high kill count. Sartana himself has a really great screen presence. We'll talk about that later in his little intro scene. Actually, I might play it at the beginning. I think that would be kind of fun because it is a good way to start the show, because he has a great line where he says, "I'm your pallbearer" or something. Anyway, so yeah, super high kill count, even if it's not bloody, but you could tell the movie's very action oriented, and the picture quality is again just it's very bad. I looked on Tubi once again. This movie's on Tubi, of course. I looked on Tubi and it was like 4080p is the best I could get, and it just, ooh, man, it's just hard to watch something so fuzzy like that. But I guess them's the breaks when it comes to these kind of old movies that were imported and stuff like that. So they didn't hold up. I wonder, it makes me wonder, like, is this just the type of streaming, like the digital recording that they did to put it on the internet, or is it like, did it really look like this when you were showing it, say, in 70 millimeter at the theater house back in the 60s and 70s? I don't know. But for right now, as it stands, as you can watch it on Tubi, picture quality is terrible, terrible. Anyway, so one of the issues about the movie, and the acting is a little bit better, a little bit. It's not laughably bad, but once again, kind of makes it worse. It is not good enough to say, "Oh, this movie's got great acting," and it's not bad enough to say this is hilariously bad. So it's just kind of the worst thing you can do in a movie is be boring and be middling. You can be, if you can offer something unique and something weird, then you're doing something right. But this movie, sometimes the reason why it's a 6 out of 10, it could be higher, is that it's just some of these parts are just kind of boring and it's just not good. One of the issues, and let's just get into it. We're done with the overview. Let's get into the narrative because it is thick. The narrative is way over convoluted, like for no reason. The entire movie, to try to explain everything would be like honestly pretty foolish. But let's try anyway. So I wrote this down a little bit so I could kind of get everything struck in my head. But so this is basically the story. A bank has a large shipment of gold, and a laundry list of factions and players are trying to get that gold. So there's all these kind of people that are trying to get the gold. It comes from the bank, it's on a shipment, and then okay, let's break down all the different types of people. Local elites, a Mexican general, American and Mexican gangster, like randomly Klaus Kaczynski's, I can never say his name right, Klaus Kaczynski's character Morgan, and his kind of maybe partner Lasky, who has a Gatling gun. We'll get to that later. A local prostitute, the bank owner himself, the guy who even sent the gold, he's in on this somehow or trying to get the gold. And then his mistress is also doing it. And then finally, Sartana himself, the titular character, is trying to get his share of the gold. Apparently, he went into some deal where he got 50% of the gold, and then someone back double crossed him. And that brings up the next point. Over the course of the film, everyone double crosses someone at some point, and sometimes there are even triple and even quadruple betrayals. It's a convoluted mess, and I can't tell you how many scenes are of someone being like, haha, we totally got one over on them, and then like, wait, what are you doing? And then they're being betrayed, and it's like, it's almost a parody of itself, where the amount of like betrayals and double crosses, and it's it's so silly. But what ends up happening, I guess, effectively as you experience it, is that during those scenes you don't really know what's going on. So there's lots of scenes where you're just like, so what am I supposed to be paying attention to? Like the Mexican general has this whole scene and he's talking to people, and I'm like, what was his deal again? Like, why is he here? What does he have to do with this? At the end of the day, you just got to remind yourself there is stolen gold. There's a lot of people that are trying to get it, and everyone's trying to kill each other and are willing, they want to be the last man standing or woman standing to be the one with the gold. No one wants to share any portions, and everyone wants to double cross each other. They partner up sometimes. Sartana and this Lasky with the Gatling gun guy, they partner up at one point after fighting each other for half the movie, and then of course they turn on each other in the climax, which we'll talk about later. It's pandemonium, but not in a good way. I think it's kind of annoying because you don't know what's going on, and it just makes you don't really care. You're so confused and it's convoluted that you're just like, I had to kind of like retroactively go back and be like, let's make sense of this story. Because watching it, like as I'm watching it, I'm just kind of like, okay, I'm just gonna have to let some of this go so that I can. Ironically, as much as they put into all this story stuff, how thick the plot is, the movie's really all just excuses for the action sequences, which there are some really good action sequences in this movie. That's all we're here for. So why make such a like way too complicated thing? But I don't know. I guess they were trying to do something. Maybe they're trying to elevate it a little bit, but it did not work for me. So let's just get into the highlights. I think that's all we have to really do with this movie. Like I said, there's not too much to get into. I don't think we need to spend so much time, but because the highlights that we're going to be getting into is going to show like the things that are actually really good about this film, and that is the action. The action is fun. That's what we're here for, and we get that in spades. Starts off great. Intro scene is awesome. The Sartana character reveal and the POV shot of him shooting his little like four shooter Derringer gadget thing, and then he whips out his rifle too and shoots a guy with that, and it's just a great like kind of wave clear of enemies, and it was just it coming off the heels of that really fun line like I'm your pallbearer. They're obviously going for cool, they're going for style, and it's kind of working. It definitely looks cooler than the last movie. Massacre Time, I think, was really trying to do this in a way, and it who knows? This movie came out 2 years later, so maybe it's trying to say, "Oh, Massacre Time was pretty good," and I liked the way that Tom looked in that movie. Let's kind of make that better, because it does almost look like a better version of what they were trying to do with Tom, making him look cool with the black hat and the black cloak. This one just had a little bit more flair to it, and his character himself is just more cool. Like he doesn't like he laughs sometimes, of course, he jokes around, but he always seems like he's one step ahead of everybody else, and that's what a good, especially a Western protagonist, if you're especially an action hero or something like that, it's a good kind of vibe to give off. So they did that really well. One of my favorite things, as I mentioned before, is that all these Gatling gun scenes are great. There's two major ones, and Lasky is always the one using them, and it's kind of like his gadget, his tool. It's just fun to see that in a movie, because there's one at the Mexican general's kind of dining hall, and it's like a ambush type thing, and that's really fun. I really liked that, just wiping all these guys out, and it adds to that body count. I don't know how many, but there's at least like 30 in the first 20 minutes. So it's got to be pretty high, especially since that Gatling gun scene comes like way later. So I loved those. There's some great atmosphere. Sometimes, sometimes the atmosphere is whatever, but like there's a scene outside of the saloon which has like just really good dark tones and dark colors, and then together with his really good costume design, I think it just really sets a tone and sets a mood that I enjoyed. I would just wish I saw more of that. I think at points they really were hitting something special, but they weren't consistent with it. I wish that scene would have amounted to a little bit more. It was like, ooh, I like the way this looks, but that's it. I just like the way it looks. And that was only one of a few scenes. I liked a lot of the darker scenes. There's a scene in a cemetery. I like the environment there. Of course, I love graveyards, so that makes sense. Western cemeteries are always kind of fun too. And yeah, that brings me to some knife throwing. Klaus Klinsky's character, he's actually a twin, and one of the twins is really good at knife throwing. And then there's that cemetery scene just has knife throwing, and it's not even him. I don't know. Just lots of knife throwing, which I'm always down for. There's a great shootout though in the desert. It's about halfway through, and Sartana is being chased by like 10 guys on horseback, and Lasky's part of it too. They're all ambushing him, and it really shows the I don't know who the actor is. I probably should know that, but Gianna Garco, that guy who plays Sartana, he just has a great physicality in the action. I mean, he's literally like running and jumping to cover. Like at one point, he jumps like off like a sand dune, and it looks like that hurts. Like that would be a long jump to do, and he just keeps running and jumps behind cover and starts shooting, and he's shooting guys off a horseback, which is cool. And it's really kinetic. It's really active. I really liked that action sequence a lot. I think it might actually, choreography wise, be the best one. Even though there's others that are a little bit more grandiose. That scene in particular, I think, really made the movie for me. Very physical, and yeah, pretty cool stuff. I like that. I do like I like the idea that he uses these little gadgets in that scene. Actually, he has this like pocket watch. It's like a pocket watch, but it's also a music box. and he puts it inside like a deer skull, and it confuses Lasky into running away. I don't know. That was a little dumb to me. And there's another scene where he uses it to kind of lure the general out of his air, like out of his little dining hall, like fort thing. And it doesn't really do anything other than menace him, I guess. I'm a little confused on what that whole thing was supposed to do. He uses it a lot to lure people and to get people to do things, and I'm like, is it hypnotizing? Is it supposed to be hypnotizing them or something? Does it confuse them? Like, what is the point of the music box pocket watch? I don't know, but it is part of his little repertoire of gadgets. He's got a little like weird like what do you call it, like gun chamber kind of spinny thing that he uses. It's almost like a top. He spins it like a top on like a gambling table, and then later it comes back into the climax, which we'll talk about. The final scene, final showdown is a little strange. The final shootout is pretty cool. At least it started off cool, and then it was kind of like whatever. Like it drew out too much. I liked the idea. So finally, after the 4th millionth backstab, Lasky is after the mistress for the bank backstabbed the bank owner for the money and teamed up with Lasky. I guess she was with him the whole time. And then now Lasky has, of course, at the last moment, has backstabbed her, or literally front stabbed her. He stabs her in the stomach. And then now it's just down to Sartana and Lasky, and they have this showdown, and it's really drawn out. And I'm not really sure what's going on with it, because like, what is his deal? Like, is they're supposed to be having some like duel, like count to 10 kind of thing, because they take one of the bags of gold, and it's like gold dust basically, and he nails it onto the post, or hangs it, and then cuts a little hole in it and says we'll shoot whenever the gold's done, whenever it's run out. And I'm like, ooh, that's kind of fun. We got like a timer, and then they're gonna have a shootout. Like, this is very classic Western stuff. And then it runs out, and they just kind of stare at each other for a little bit, and they drop their bullets, and I'm like, I had to watch this scene a few times. I'm still confused of what the deal is. I think Lasky is drops the bullet to show like, I'm not going to shoot you, and then he's like, actually, JK, I have bullets in my gun. I'm going to shoot you. And then that's when this little spinning top gadget that Sartana comes in handy, because then since he dropped his bullet, he still shot Lasky and killed him. And Lasky says, I knew it. And I'm like, knew what? I don't know. And then he shows this old man who's always hanging around, and Sartana, the old man, comes in. He's kind of like comic relief. I think he's like the gravedigger or something, or the mortician. And he like shows him in his chamber of his little derringer is the spinning top gadget with gun bullets in it. And I guess he's saying it's a hidden like bullet chamber inside the gun that would fool Lasky into thinking that his gun was empty, but it actually had bullets in it. I think that makes sense. I think that's the only thing that makes sense to me. And I'm sorry for those of you that have not seen this movie and probably never will, because I'm trying to explain things that are honestly not very interesting or important. But anyway, overall, the movie was fun. The action sequences were fun, I should say. And then everything else was like too convoluted. I think it was more competently made. I think that the style was a little bit better, and that the action sequences were done better, and they were more consistent throughout the movie. The high kill count and the Gatling gun and stuff like that really elevated this film a little bit higher than Massacre Time. But overall, I feel like it was easier for me to engage with Massacre Time throughout the whole movie, whereas I was finding myself kind of not getting bored, like a little listless watching this movie, which I don't think is a good sign. So I think all in all, they kind of even out, both of them being 6 out of 10, because they have pluses or minuses together, and it's about the same amount of quality, truly. The thing, if we're trying to connect all these movies to this theme, I would say this movie is more violent, more consistently action based, and some of the action in this film reminded me a little bit more of The Wild Bunch, with its like kinetic energy, I guess, especially like the last scene of The Wild Bunch, the Battle of the Bloody Porch. There's a lot going on, a lot of cuts you have to make, a lot of shooting, and this movie had a lot more of like a consistent shooting, whereas I feel like Massacre Time, especially even the last scene, was like a little bit more drawn out, a little bit more segmented. Some of the action scenes, and I'm specifically thinking really of this scene in the sand dunes or in the desert, was a lot more consistently kinetic and and I think the editing was just more similar to what you're seeing in the Wild Bunch. And so maybe these things didn't happen in a vacuum. So I'm gonna go ahead and guess that Sam Peckinpah probably knew that these movies existed, especially if he's making a Western. He's probably very aware of Western movies. And so I gotta think that these increasingly action oriented, violent, more high kill count based movies from these spaghetti westerns are starting to inform the more mainstream westerns, and then the Wild Bunch is maybe a culmination of that violence meeting new practical effects, which is the blood packs. So it makes sense to me, and I mean, it's kind of like how slashers start to inform other horror movies within the main genre, so that now you have some of these hybrids where instead of slashers being kind of like low key B movie kind of things, there are some higher value ones that come in later in the 80s and 90s that start to or just horror movies that are more normal that have slasher elements to them. So I think that's maybe, I think we can relate those two things possibly. But yeah, other than that, there isn't too much to talk about with this movie. We'll cut it a little short today, especially for a video podcast. I'm happy with about 20 or so minutes. I hope you guys enjoyed this theme. I know the second two movies were a little bit more nuanced and maybe movies that people wouldn't want to check out. So I have a feeling that these aren't going to be my most popular episodes, but it's always fun for me to dive into a new genre that I haven't really gotten into. I don't think I've really ever seen like these types of spaghetti westerns before, which is really fun for me. I mean, even though they're not like the best things ever, it's like a whole new area of movies. Like it's like, especially with these sequels that this movie has, like Sartana is this like legendary character. There's even a movie called Sartana and Django, which is making me be like, ugh, what's the deal with Django? I haven't really looked into that. And obviously with Quentin Tarantino, he's making a reference with Django Unchained. So I'm like, obviously Quentin Tarantino has watched all these movies. Oh, also before I go, I wanted to say that it was brought to my attention by one of my friends, shout out to Jeff, that this movie, The Wild Bunch that we did at the beginning of this theme, is actually supposed to be Quentin Tarantino's favorite movie. I didn't know that, and it totally makes sense. I even referenced Django Unchained in that movie as being like maybe the plantation bloody shootout is a reference or an homage to the bloody Battle of the Bloody Porch. And I think I might be right on that. So I think that was kind of cool that I inadvertently connected those two things. And it's very much like Quentin Tarantino to take older movies and try to redo shots and all that kind of stuff. I mean, Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2 is just Lady Snowblood. Like, it's like their movies it's basically a remake, honestly, which is pretty crazy, especially since it's not actually referenced, but it is referenced in its style. So there's mad respect there. And of course, if you watch, there's like Reservoir Dogs, and then if you watch Tokyo Drifter, you're like watching Tokyo Drifter, and you're like, oh, I see where Reservoir Dogs came from. So Quentin Tarantino likes to go back to these 60s, especially 60s movies, and kind of recreate them in different ways. So it totally makes sense. So I thought that was kind of fun. This is a cool theme. I actually didn't mention this either. This is my first Western theme of the I think it's my first Western theme ever. I've done Westerns. I did A Few Dollars More. That might be the only Western I've done. I have to think. Like, I don't do a lot of Westerns. Not that I don't like them. It's just, I don't know. I just haven't done it yet. So this is my first Western theme. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll get into another one later. I'm rattling some Western ideas, but that's what I was talking about with just so many different genres. This is a whole new spaghetti westerns is a whole new genre. You can go down a rabbit hole. You could do an entire, I know you could do this. You could do an entire podcast that would run for years just covering every spaghetti western movie ever made. And that's it's awesome to me. It just knows that there's never going to be enough movies. I'm always a little bit afraid that I'm going to watch all the movies, because like sometimes you kind of feel like you're like, oh man, what movie am I going to watch now? I've seen so many. And especially if you're looking for a certain vibe, you're like, well, I'd have to just watch this movie again. But there's always more movies. Just do some research, go on IMDb, have a fun time looking at relateds, and then going down that kind of rabbit hole of related links. Anyway, I'm rambling because this episode's really short. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Next week, I don't know what theme I'm going to do, but I'm going to think about it, and we'll get back to you. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you guys have a great week this week, and I will see you next Friday.